Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me. We're going to be in chapter 12 of 2 Corinthians and probably go through verse 4 of chapter 13. It all ties together. As Paul begins chapter 12, this thing of boasting continues. He will say in verse 1, "It is doubtless not profitable for me to boast. I will come to visions and revelations of the Lord. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago, whether in body I do not know, out of the body I do not know. God knows such a one caught up to third heaven. I know such a man, whether in body or out of the body I do not know. God knows how he was caught up into paradise and heard inexpressible words, which is not lawful for me to utter. Of such a one I will boast, yet of myself I will not boast except in infirmities. If I might desire to boast, I will not be a true fool. I will not be a fool, for I will speak the truth, but I refrain lest anyone should think of me above what he sees me to be and hears from me." First of all, he says, what I'm going to tell you is basically going to be of no benefit to you or of me. It's not going to produce edification. But here's the boasting. Now, here's the contrast. Here he calls these eminent apostles, these false apostles, and they come boasting. And Paul said, well, if there's something to boast about, let me tell you about this. Have they been there to do this? Paul is speaking in third person here. It seems to me like he's speaking about himself. I could be wrong. But he's talking about this revelation, this vision that he received about going up to paradise. And it was so amazing, so indescribable. He can't describe it, but he said it's not lawful, it's not proper for me to even tell you things. It's, number one, if I told you, you wouldn't understand it. Number two, I've been restrained from doing so. But he said, I'm not going to boast in that. If I'm going to boast, I'm going to boast in my infirmities. How many of us would take that tack? How many of us would boast and say, let me tell you how weak I am. Let me tell you about all my flaws. But Paul says, I'm not interested in elevating myself. What I'm interested in elevating and who I'm interested in elevating is Christ. And so he says, for though I might desire to boast, I will not be a fool, for I will speak the truth. But I refrain lest anyone should think of me above what he sees and hears. And so Paul says, I'm going to pull back. I'm not going to do this boasting except only in my infirmities. And then he talks about how this messenger of Satan came. God allowed this messenger of Satan, he called a thorn in the flesh. And it was to buffet him. To buffet is to strike with a fist. To beat as someone that is just a rowdy person and bring them down. To strike with a blow. And here's this thorn. A thorn pricks, pierces, and is painful. And so he says, unless I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations, that's these revelations he's just talking about, I was given a thorn in the flesh. And evidently it was quite painful. He prayed 3 times to God for it to be removed. And God's answer was, my grace is sufficient for you, for he says, my strength is made perfect in weakness. So Paul says, more gladly I will boast in my infirmities. Why? That the power of Christ may rest on me. It's all about Christ. It's not about me. I want people to see the power of Christ in me. And he's going to refer to that again in chapter 13. Paul is only interested in Christ being seen in him and the power of Christ being seen in him. So he says, when I'm weak, then I'm strong. What an attitude to take about the infirmities. He's not griping or complaining, not moaning, not concerned about his threat of life. He's only concerned that the power of Christ rest in him and that the power of Christ be seen. What an amazing attitude and spirit that Paul has. Then he says in verse 11 through 13, I become a fool in boasting. You have compelled me. For I ought to have been commended by you, for nothing was I behind the most eminent apostles, though I am nothing. Have you ever had a friend just rip you behind your back instead of standing up for you? Paul said, look, you Corinthians know me. And instead of standing up for me and defending me, you have swallowed hook, line, and sinker what these most eminent apostles have been bringing you. He has said earlier, I'm not behind any of them. But now then he will say, again, I'm not behind the most eminent apostles, though I am nothing. Paul said, I'm just a nobody. I'm just nobody here compared to them. But then he said, and this is the first time he says this. He could have said this all along, and it would have ended the matter. Instead of saying, I'm coming to you the third time, which I think is the third time he's talking to them about why he has delayed his coming. He did that in 1 Corinthians 16, 2 Corinthians chapter 1, and now here. This is the third time I've tried to tell you why I delayed my coming. And I tried to tell you I delayed my coming because I didn't want it to be bad for you when I came, and I didn't want it to be bad for me. I didn't want it to produce mourning on your part and mourning, weeping on my part. I didn't want to come deliver the sharp rebuke to you. I wanted to come and I wanted to find great joy with you, and therefore joy with me because of you. But he says, okay, I came behind these most eminent apostles and nothing. I came bringing you. He says, looky here. Look, signs of an apostles were accomplished among you with all perseverance and signs, wonders, and mighty deeds. For what is it in which we were inferior to other churches, except that I myself was not burdensome to you? Forgive me of this wrong. I came to you and I brought the signs of an apostle, confirming that I was an apostle. Have they brought signs confirming they're apostles? Have they brought signs confirming the word is from God? I brought signs of an apostle confirming myself as an apostle and the word that I was preaching, that it is from God. The only thing I didn't ask of you was support. I laid aside my right to support. And that's what your problem is with me. Well, then forgive me this wrong. Here you see a sarcasm coming out here. In other words, I can't believe you're holding that against me. That a robber of the church is taking wages that will not come to you free of charge, because freely it was given to me and freely I give. I'm not asking to be a burden to anyone. But whoa, if that's what the problem is, then forgive me for not asking. In fact, my own companions didn't ask you that. Notice what he will say in verse 17. Did I take advantage of any of you? By any of those whom I sent to you? He said, no. In fact, he now uses the illustration of a parent in verse 15. Or verse 14. For the children ought not to lay up for the parents, but the parents for the children. And I will very gladly spend and be spent for your souls. Though the more abundantly I love you, the less I am loved. Be that as it may, I did not burden you. Nevertheless, being crafty, I caught you by cunning. So here he uses the illustration of a parent. A parent lays up for the child, not the child for the parent. I laid up for you. I provided for you. I asked nothing of you. You provided nothing. I gave everything to you. I gladly spent. I gladly loved. I gladly exerted everything I had for you. But now then, you're caught between a rock and a hard place here. Look at why Paul wanted to come to visit them. I'll just list a couple of things. First of all, he had no image to protect. Verse 11, I'm a nobody. Second, he had no score to keep. Verse 14. He announces all he has done has been at his own expense. Third, he had a servant's heart. Verse 15. I'm not seeking what is yours, but your own, as a parent lays up for a child. Then fourth, I want you to see he refused to take advantage of them. Here's this vicious slander that's been coming, but I refuse to take advantage of you. Did I charge anybody? No. Fifth, verse 18, he modeled for them what he wanted. I urged Titus and sent our brother with him. Did Titus take advantage of you? Did he walk in the same spirit? Did we not walk in the same spirit? Did we not walk in the same steps? Is my image too little importance to you? Do I keep score? Have I taken advantage of you in any way? Has Titus taken advantage of you in any way? Is that what's taking place? And the answer to all that is no. And he said, I know this was crafty, but I caught you by cunning. But then he comes in verse 19 and says again, do you think we excuse ourselves to you? We speak before Christ, before God in Christ, and we do all things, beloved, for your edification. Do you think we are defending ourselves to you? Do you think that's what this is all about? Do you think we've come offering this defense, that we're so hurt by this, we've got to we have to defend ourselves because you won't defend us? Well, he's doing that, but he's doing it out of sarcasm. And he says, out of being a fool, playing a boast, giving a boast by playing a fool. But he says in verse 20, and notice, I fear lest. I fear lest when I come. I fear I shall not find you as I wish, and that I shall be found by you such as you do not wish. I fear that when I come, things aren't going to be well. And he's going to explain that in just a moment. Lest there be contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, backbiting, whisperings, conceits, tumults. That's when I come, my God will humble me among you. He says, I fear I will not find you as I want, that things will not be good. I fear I will find debatings, strife, contentions, jealousies, suspicions, wrath, hot anger, outbursts of anger, sudden explosions, factions, self-seeking ambition leading to self-seeking followers, backbiting, speaking against, slandering, loudmouth attacks, insults flung openly and loudly in public, whisperings, secret slander, gossiping under their breath or in secret, a much nastier thing than backbitings. It's hard to defend yourself when someone's underground. Swellings, puffed up with pride, the pride of the ambitious, tumults, disturbances, confusions, and commotions. He said, I fear I'll find these things. Now, back in the first chapter, he has addressed this in chapter 3, that there's strife among them. And in chapter 14, he dealt with this strife and confusion and chaos over the spiritual gifts that they were fighting one another over. And while he has said a lot of commendable things to them here he is taking their gloves off and smacking them right dab on the point of the nose. And he said, I fear lest when I come, God will humble me, that I'll not find you as I want to find you. In fact, I fear when I come, I'll find some have not repented, whether that includes the man of 1 Corinthians 5 or others. I fear that some will not have repented when I come. Notice what he says. I shall mourn for many who have sinned before and have not repented of the uncleanness, a general word for sexual immorality. Fornication, a more specific word for sexual immorality. Lewdness, which they have practiced. Lewdness would be wantonness, acting without restraint, just giving themselves over to base appetites, base desires. I fear when I come, that's what I'm going to find. I fear when I come, I'm going to find these people who have not repented, and it's not going to be good. It's not going to be good for you. It's not going to be good for me. He said early in the book, only those who have made me mourn can make me happy. And here he's concerned about being brought to mourning again. So he continues in verse 13, or chapter 13. This will be the third time I'm coming to you. By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word shall be established. Again, I think it's like he said earlier here, the third time. This is the third time I've come explaining myself to you. There's no evidence Paul had visited them a third time, or intended to visit a third time, but this is the third time I've come trying to explain all this to you. But when I come, if these things are true, they're going to be established at the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. Now, these are not 2 or 3 who heard this. These are 2 or 3 who have witnessed this, who have seen this. I'm not bringing somebody who hasn't seen it to corroborate the charge. I'm calling witnesses who have witnessed it to verify the charge. And so I'm coming the third time, but this is what I see. I'm going to establish it at the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. So he says, I've told you before and foretell as if I were present the second time and now absent. In chapter 5, he said, though absent, I'm with you in spirit. And so I've told you before, but I'm still, though absent, I am with you. I still have the same spirit. Again, I write to those who have sinned before and to all the rest, that if I come again, I will not spare. So again, I'm writing to warn. I don't want this sharp rebuke. I don't want anybody to be in this condition. I'm writing to those who have not repented and to the rest of the congregation. Remember in chapter 5, he spent 12 verses talking to the church, one talking to the man guilty of fornication. So if we play that out, here is the rest of the church. And the rest of the church are involved in these lewd things, which were a part of Corinth. To Corinthianize was to be an insult. It was to be called an immoral person. Corinth was the citadel of filth and immorality and sensuality and pride and greed. It was the citadel of all that was unclean. And it was not unusual for people to be drawn back into that. You came out of that, but now possibly being drawn back into that. I pray that's not the case. But I'm writing to you to warn you about this. Oh, and by the way, he says, you seek the power, since you seek a proof of Christ speaking in me, who is not weak toward you, but mighty in you. So when I come, you're seeking proof of Christ in me. Is that really what you want to receive? Is that the kind of proof you want to receive of Christ speaking in me? Do you really want this kind of strong disciplinary action that will demonstrate to you who Christ is speaking in me? Is that really what you want? And so then he says, for though he was crucified in weakness, yet he lives by the power of God. For we also are weak in him, but we also live with him by the power of God to you. Weakness in that he gave himself to those who crucified him. He did not resist. He was hung on a cross and was weak as men consider him. And Paul said, as men look at us, we are weak too, but we are strong. We're strong by the power of God. The power of God that raised Christ from the dead is the same power that is working in us. And so we are perceived as weak like Christ was perceived as weak. But we are strong in the power of God. So Paul has given his defense of his boast and has really brought to bear in a very pointed way his charge against the Corinthians who have been duped by these most eminent apostles. And he has exposed these eminent apostles for who they are. We'll finish the book in our next study. Thank you for joining me. Stay healthy and stay safe.